Well, for the first time since the war in Ukraine began more than a month ago, there is perhaps some reason for optimism tonight and the possibility of peace. After another round of talks today, Russia promised to fundamentally scale back its attacks on Ukraine's capital in an effort to increase mutual trust in the talks aimed at ending the fighting. And Ukraine has offered neutrality, meaning it would abandon any effort to join military alliances such as NATO or host military bases on its soil, in exchange for security guarantees that Canada and other NATO countries could be asked to enforce. How hopeful are these developments, and is there a potential role for Canada in an eventual peace agreement? Christian Leuprecht is an international security and defense expert, a professor at both the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University in Kingston. Professor, good to see you. Thanks for taking time to speak with me. I appreciate it. How optimistic are you about the possibilities for a ceasefire, given the latest developments at the peace talks in Turkey?
Well, I think, so this is a two-step process. First, trying to get a ceasefire in place, and then trying to develop a pathway towards a negotiated settlement that might actually be sustainable and provide the security guarantees that Ukraine would be looking for in return for signing on initially to a ceasefire to begin with. So the fact that the two sides are talking and seem to be talking at reasonably high levels, and that there's a number of quite prominent countries and individuals who appear to be mediating, that does suggest that there may be some hope on the one hand for the Russians to understand that their political objectives are better advanced through diplomacy than they are on the battlefield. And for Ukraine to continue to demonstrate that it has the ability and the resolve and the backing of partner countries to put up a long fight if it has to, as a way of forcing the Russians to the table.
Right. How significant is this offer of neutrality from Ukraine to abandon any efforts to join military alliances such as NATO?
It just reflects the reality of the way things are. I mean, when the Bush administration in 2008 made the announcement that Ukraine and Georgia could somehow join NATO, but never laid out a pathway, that's of course because several key European allies, Germany for instance, were ferociously opposed to any such offering to begin with, and especially without having agreed on a pathway. So this was not a NATO decision. This was a unilateral U.S. Bush administration decision that basically, and so what we get now is sort of a reflection of the reality. But I think there's one other piece at play here. Now that Finland and Sweden have been musing more openly and publicly with the prospect of joining NATO, Russia would also want to make sure that those countries remain outside of NATO. And so I think the offer of neutrality by Ukraine is implicitly also a signal to Sweden and to Finland to remain neutral.
Ukraine, in return for that neutrality, wants the security guarantees that could include Canada as a guarantor. What's Ukraine after?
So, of course, there is no such thing as neutrality in this case, right? So just the way Finland and Sweden are in the European Union and clearly in the Western camp, so I think there's going to be an acknowledgement that Ukraine is going to be in the Western camp going forward, especially given what in reaction to Russia's aggression and invasion. But what Russia ultimately is after ensuring that there will be no change in prospect of NATO membership per se. The challenge, of course, will the Ukrainians trust whatever security guarantees the West can offer? Because the 1994 protocol had security guarantees by the United States and the United Kingdom in particular to Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up what at the time was the fourth largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. And so it'll be very interesting to see what confidence building measures the West can actually provide that might be acceptable to both Ukraine and Russia to provide those security guarantees.
Right. So quickly, what would the role of a guarantor be? Would it make sense for Canada to play that role?
It would very much make sense. It would be in the historical trajectory of Canada. 1956, the Suez Crisis, where Canada effectively invented peacekeeping. It didn't invent peacekeeping to make the world a better place. It invented peacekeeping to avoid the superpowers from going to war, in particular, and from going to a nuclear war. And so Canada and all middle powers have the same objective here, to avoid an escalation of this war, and in particular from this turning into hot war between the United States and Russia. And so it would very much make sense for a country like Canada to make what might need to be a very significant commitment, if that means in return we could actually get a settlement. And I think there are few European countries that would have sufficient trust on both sides. So I think Canada can, again, as it did in the Suez Crisis, potentially play a critical role here.
What will you be watching for in the next few days here?
It'll be interesting to see how the government of Canada will move forward here, because, of course, as I've said repeatedly, Canada has proven a rather unreliable ally to the NATO alliance in this conflict. At the same time, if there is a prospect of Canada providing security guarantees to Ukraine, and those also needing to be acceptable to Russia, it means Canada will want to be cautious about how overtly it now steps up with support for the alliance and for Ukraine. So I think we'll be trying to see what sort of middle road the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and the Foreign Minister can find, because it would very much be in Canada's strategic and national interest to be able to play this role if this role is indeed on the table.
All right. Christian Leuprecht, always good to get your perspective. Thanks again for providing it today.
My pleasure. Thank you.